Nowadays, and for the past 5 centuries, since the introduction of the heliocentric globe deception, all world maps and explorers have depicted and described the North Pole and surrounding region as being nothing but an arbitrary point in a semi-frozen tundra. Previous to this, however, depictions and descriptions of the North Pole and surrounding regions in world maps and ancient explorers' accounts were very different. Firstly, before the 16th century, the North Pole was never once shown or thought to be just some random, ambiguous point amidst a low-salinity Arctic Ocean as it is now. Instead, the North Pole was universally described and depicted from diverse cultures all across the Earth as being a gigantic magnetic mountain situated directly below Polaris. The prevailing belief was that compass needles the world over were actually pointing to a huge lodestone mountain made of magnetite at the pole, in contrast to today's prevailing belief that compass needles are pointing to some constantly moving magnetic field generated by hypothetical molten metal existing at the center of a fantastical globe Earth. While neither claim can be confirmed or denied without independent exploration and experimentation, it should be noted that nowhere in nature can we find molten metal which retains any significant magnetic properties once heated past the Curie point, let alone create some convoluted, constantly moving dipolar field as is claimed by proponents of the fantasy ball Earth. Ancient Buddhist, Vedic, and Jain traditional cosmologies all state that at the North Pole magnetic center point of Earth exists a circular mountain of magnetite called Mount Meru. Puranic and Sumerian traditions also referred to this place, calling it Mount Sumeru. In ancient Iran they spoke of Mount Hara Barazati, with a celestial spring on its highest peak in the realm of the stars. In early Chinese writings there is Mount Kunlun, with a bronze pillar of heaven at the summit where the immortals dwell, often also called the Pearl Mountain, a paradise home of 4 great rivers around which the heavens revolve. The Turkmen tribes of southern Turkestan told of a copper pillar that marks the navel of the earth. The Mongols wrote of Mount Sumber, with the Zambu tree on its summit. The Buryats of Siberia talked of Mount Sumur, with the North Pole Star fastened to its summit. The Siberian Dalmaks spoke of a mountain lake from which 4 rivers flow to the points of the compass. The Egyptians wrote of the Mound of the First Time, which was the first land to appear from the waters, and is the dwelling place of the high god, the source of light. The Muslims wrote of Kaf, and the Zoroastrians wrote of Gurnagar, the world-encircling mountains. The Navajos spoke of Encircled Mountain, which was surrounded by 4 directional mountains. The Dogon tribe of Nigeria told of a cosmic pillar spanning 14 worlds, which was the roof post of the house of the high god Amma. The Warao Indians of the Orinoco Delta in Venezuela speak of a cosmic axis extending above the center of their Earth disk. Ancient Greek mythology referred to Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. The ancient Germans told of Irminsul, a universal column which sustains everything. The Norse Edda spoke of Asgard, the burg of the gods, rising in the center of Midgard, the circular earth. Ptolemy recounted a legend involving magnetic islands which exerted such strong attraction that ships with metal nails were held in place and unable to leave. In the Arabic legend, 1001 Nights, a magnetic mountain pulls all the nails right out of their ship, causing it to fall apart and sink. The second tallest mountain in Tanzania is even named Mount Meru, after its primordial partner at the pole. Richard Thompson wrote, "In many traditions, the world mountain is identified symbolically with some local mountain. This is illustrated by Mount Olympus of the Greeks, Mount Alborz of the Iranians, and Mount Kunlun of the Chinese. In Near Eastern tradition, the world mountain is the small hill in Jerusalem known as Mount Zion. Thus, the circular continent centered on Jerusalem in medieval maps also possessed a symbolic world mountain." John Phillips wrote, "Jerusalem was Paul's lodestone. The ancient mariners who set sail in their little cockleshell boats tended to hug the coastline, not daring to get too far from land. Aids to navigation were few, and their vessels were at the mercy of wind and wave. The slightest sign of a storm would send them scurrying for refuge. Moreover, the dreams of those old-time venturers were haunted by the thoughts of the fabled Lodestone Mountain. They believed it had the power to draw their vessels to shipwreck on its shores against all the pull of tide and wind. Isaiah wrote about a mountain, set above all other mountains, in the far recesses of the north, where the gods meet, called Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Genesis, Ezekiel, and Enoch all mention a paradisical Eden, the mountain of God, and source of 4 main rivers. Genesis 2:10-14 reads, "And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted, and became into 4 heads. The name of the first is Pison, that is which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium, and the onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon, the same is it that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, that is it which goeth toward the east of Assyria. And the 4th river is Euphrates." Muhammad also spoke of 4 rivers and a divine tree. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, 4 branches of the celestial Ganges flow out from Brahmapuri on top of Mount Sumeru. In ancient Canaan, Gur-ili, the mountain of El, was the dwelling of El, the creator, and a place of assembly for the demigods. In one Phoenician ivory carving from around 1000 BC, a deity is shown dressed to represent a mountain with 4 streams coming out from the mountain god-man at right angles. Similarly, in an ancient Akkadian hymn to the goddess Ishtar, she is addressed as the Queen of the Mountain of the World and Queen of the Land of the 4 Rivers of Erech. And she says, "I am Lord of the steep mountains which tremble whilst their summits reach to the firmament." In the Christian apocryphal Book of Enoch, Enoch is taken by angels on a tour of the 7 heavens, and while in the 3rd heaven shown magnificent trees producing wonderful fruits, with adjacent springs pumping honey, milk, oil, and wine, to 4 directional rivers flowing down into paradisical Eden, an abode specially prepared only for the pious and selfless. Similarly, in the Hindu cosmology, 4 trees in Alavarta Varsa stand on great mountains, producing rivers of nectar and honey, like fountains of youth, providing health and vitality to all who drink of them, while the central tallest jambu tree rises to incredible heights and seems to cover all the heavens. Richard Thompson wrote, "In the Bhagavata Purana, Mount Sumeru is surrounded by 4 great mountains, surmounted by 4 gigantic trees. These include the Jambu tree, after which Jambudweep is named. 4 huge lakes of milk, honey, sugarcane juice, and pure water are located between the 4 mountains, and these lakes confer mystic powers on the celestial beings who bathe in them. There are also 4 celestial gardens near these lakes. From the foot of each of the 4 trees, there flows a river that either emerges from the tree itself or from the fruits of the tree. These rivers of honey and different kinds of juice flow throughout the region of Ilavarta Varsa, surrounding Mount Sumeru, and they confer freedom from fatigue, disease, and old age on the inhabitants of that region." The Yaku people of northeastern Siberia have their own strikingly similar ancient myth, where a world tree of immeasurable age exists at the navel of the earth, just like the Hindu Jambu tree is born of the umbilical knot of Brahma. The Yaku world tree reaches into the high heavens with cones 9 fathoms long and sap which imparts youthfulness on all who consume it. Near the Yaku tree also lies a lake of sweet milk, which is where the popular modern Japanese milk company Yaku doubtless gets its inspiration. Richard Thompson wrote, "In different traditions, the upper and lower worlds may be divided into several levels, often 7 or 9. In the center of the earth disk there is a world mountain or world pillar that links Middle Earth to the lower and upper worlds. The world mountain represents the polar axis, and the dwellings of great demigods are located on its summit. The world mountain may be surrounded by other mountains that define the cardinal directions, and these directions may be associated with certain colors. 4 sacred rivers may also flow from the world mountain in the 4 cardinal directions. There is a world tree that is often situated on the world mountain, or 4 world trees may be located on the neighboring directional mountains. The world tree extends from the earth to the heavens, and it is nearly immortal. It is the source of rivers of nectar or pure water that give health and longevity to those who drink them. The tree stands in an earthly paradise where there are celestial gardens and rivers of various substances such as milk, oil, and honey. The tree or world pillar is often associated with a great eagle-like bird that is the enemy of great serpents dwelling in the lower world. In ancient Iranian thought, a mountain called Hera Berzati, or Alborj, stands at the center of the earth, a fixed point around which the sun, moon, and stars revolve. At its summit lies the dwelling place of Ormuzd, the Lord of Light, complete with a giant miraculous tree, an Edenic garden of Ahura Mazda, and the celestial fountain Ardusur, which is the mother of all earthly water and flows down towards 4 cardinal points into 4 large streams. The bridge Chinavad reaches from the peak of Alborj to the solid vault of heaven, or Gorodman, the home of the pious and blessed, whilst underneath lies the great gulf of Dozak, the abysmal abode of the Lord of Darkness, Ahriman. The earliest cosmogony recorded by the Japanese in their most ancient book, the Kojiki, once again mirrors this recurring mythology. In the beginning, Izanagi and Izanani, the great god and goddess, standing in heaven, drove a celestial spear into the endless sea and twisted it around until an island rose from the water. They then descended from heaven to earth and built a palace around the huge spear, using it as the central pillar. This spear became the central axis of the world, and their palace the birthplace of the human race. In the Kojiki and Shinto religion, the Creator and the North Pole are so purposely and inseparably linked that one of the often used names of God translates to the Lord of the Center of Heaven. The Ainos, supposed first inhabitants of Japan, whose name means offspring of the centered, are believed to have arrived onto the archipelago from the north, and bury their dead facing north to where their ancestors came and to which their spirits would return. In Buddhist funeral ceremonies, bodies are cremated in special crematoriums actually called meru, which are essentially tall stone pillars with 4 doors at the peak aligned to the cardinal directions, with the belief that our reincarnated souls will pass Mount Meru before returning to earthly bodies. Literally every temple and the little spirit house shrines found in most Buddhist homes are also representations of Meru, the abode of the gods, aligned to the 4 cardinal directions and opulently embellished with gold, jewelry, and metaphysical artwork. Dr. William Warren wrote, Köppen assures us that every orthodoxly constructed Buddhist temple either is or contains a symbolical representation of the divine regions of Meru and of the heaven of the gods, saints, and Buddhas rising above it. Lilly says, the 13 pyramidal layers at the top of every temple in Nepal represent the 13 unchangeable heavens of Amitabha. Faber develops the evidence of this practice among the ancients with great fullness, and with respect to the Hindus and Buddhists says, each pagoda, each pyramid, each montiform high place is invariably esteemed to be a copy of the holy hill Meru. Ancient South American traditions also believed the human race was birthed in the farthest north, upon the highest of mountains, surrounded by perpetual clouds, fountainhead of the world's waters, and home of god Tlaloc, residing on their sacred paradise mountains, Tlapalan. The first man, Quetzalcoatl, was said to have drank the water of immortality from Tlaloc's mountain, and ruled as king throughout the Golden Age in Mexico. The many Incan, Mayan, Aztec, and other step pyramids and temples aligned to cardinal directions and devoted to the gods are representative of this world mountain. Interestingly enough, many modern Mexican myths now represent the mountain as crooked or partially turned over. Similarly, in the ancient Chinese Taoist tradition, a myth over 4,000 years old refers to Shang-Te, the highest of all gods, who lives in Si-Wei, described as a celestial space above the North Pole. Shang-Te's abode is said to exist directly over the peak of Mount Kunlun, which again places the highest god at Polaris. As with the other cosmologies, Mount Kunlun is a primeval paradise, abode of the gods, with a world tree in the middle and a fountain of immortality from which 4 rivers flow outwards to the 4 corners of the earth. Dr. William Warren wrote, "Sparkling fountains and purling streams contain the far-famed ambrosia. One may there rest on flowery carpeted swards, listening to the melodious warbling of birds, or feasting upon the delicious fruits, at once fragrant and luscious, which hang from the branches of the luxuriant groves. Whatever there is beautiful in landscape or grand in nature may also be found there in the highest state of perfection. All is charming, all enchanting, and whilst nature smiles, the company of genii delights the ravished visitor. Where now is the Paradise Mountain located? At the North Pole. Immediately over the central peak of Kunlun appears the polar star, which is Shang-Te's heavenly abode. In the central place, the polar star of heaven, the one bright one, the great monad, always dwells. In accordance with this conception, the emperor and his assistants, when officiating before the altar of heaven, always face the north. The pole star itself is a prominent object of worship." Both the ancient Orientals and Greeks turned to face north before commencing prayer. Homer states that when addressing the gods of Mount Olympus, they would stretch their arms toward the northern sky, and Plato also confirms that this holy habitation of Zeus was placed in the center of the world. Heraclitus said that it touches the ether and casts a shadow 5,000 stadia in length. Herodotus stated the mountain to be very tapering and round, so lofty, moreover, that the top cannot be seen, the clouds never quitting it either summer or winter. The natives call this mountain the Pillar of Heaven, and they themselves take their name from it, being called Atlantes. They are reported not to eat any living thing. Strabo claimed it was an earthly paradise, with gigantic olive trees and grape clusters a cubit in length. Pliny described a river of milk descending from great heights, and called the mountain a fabulosissimum. Maximus Tyrius claimed the ocean waves stopped short before reaching the mountain, standing up like a wall around its base, though unrestrained by any earthly barrier. Nothing but the air and the sacred thicket prevent the water from reaching the mountain. In the Phaedo, Socrates is quoted as saying, "All things that grow, trees and flowers and fruit, are fairer than any here, and there are hills and stones in them, smoother and more transparent and fairer in color than our highly valued emeralds and sardonyx and jaspers and other gems, which are but minute fragments of them. For there all the stones are like our precious stones, and fairer still. The temperament of their seasons is such that the inhabitants have no disease and live much longer than we do, and have sight and hearing and smell and all the other senses in much greater perfection. And they have temples and sacred places in which the gods really dwell, and they hear their voices and receive their answers, and are conscious of them, and hold converse with them, and they see the sun, the moon, and stars as they really are." Dr. William Warren wrote, "The evidence that in ancient Hellenic thought also the heaven of the gods was in the northern sky is incidental, but cumulative and satisfactory. For example, heaven is upheld by Atlas, but the terrestrial station of Atlas, as we have elsewhere shown, is at the North Pole. Again, Olympus was the abode of the gods, but if the now generally current etymology of this term is correct, Olympus was simply the Atlantean pillar, pictured as a lofty mountain, and supporting the sky at its northern pole. In fact, many writers now affirm that the Olympus of Greek mythology was originally simply the North Polar world mountain of the Asiatic nations. The ancient Germanic and Finnish people also, when praying or sacrificing to the gods, always faced north, and in the Scandinavian Eddas, both Asgard and Nidavellir are represented as the navel, or center of the world. For them, atop the Yggdrasil tree at Earth's center was the heavenly Asgard, home of the gods. Today we still pay respect to this primitive tradition at Christmas when we top our symbolic world trees with a bright yellow pole star. Dr. William Warren wrote, "We have already seen that the term navel was anciently used in many languages for center, and that the pole or central point of the revolving constellations was the navel of heaven. But as to the celestial pole, there corresponds a terrestrial one. So it is only natural that to the term the navel of heaven there should be the corresponding expression the navel of the earth. Beginning with Christian traditions, let us make a pilgrimage to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre at Jerusalem. There, in the portion belonging to the Greek Christians, we shall discover a round pillar, some 2 feet high, projecting from the marble pavement but supporting nothing. If we inquire as to its purpose, we shall be informed that it is designed to mark the exact center or navel of the earth. Early pilgrims and chroniclers refer to this curious monument, but its antiquity no one knows. In the Indian Puranas, both the terms navel of the earth and navel of heaven are used repeatedly and always referring to a place not in or near India, but rather at the North Pole. Hymns from the Rig Veda speak of the supporting column of heaven, otherwise known as the Atlas pillar of Vedic cosmology, and describe it as standing upon the navel of earth. In the 5th verse of the 185th hymn, day and night are represented as twin sisters in the bosom of their parents, heaven and earth, where they lock arms and spin circles around a common center point, namely the navel. This is also echoed in a mysterious passage by Quintus Curtius, which has baffled modern commentators, stating how the object which represented the divine being resembled a navel set in gems. Dr. William Warren wrote, "If anything is needed to disprove the common notion that geographical ignorance and national self-esteem first governed the ancient peoples in locating in their own countries navels of the earth, it is furnished by what is, in all probability, the oldest epic in the world, that of Izubar, fragments of which have survived in the oldest literature of Babylonia. These fragments show that the earliest inhabitants of the Tigro-Euphrates basin located the center of the earth, not in their own midst, but in a far-off land of sacred associations, where the holy house of the gods is situated, a land into the heart whereof man hath not penetrated, a place underneath the overshadowing world tree, and beside the full waters. No description could more perfectly identify the spot with the Arctic pole of ancient Asiatic mythology. Yet this testimony stands not alone, for in the fragment of another ancient text, translated by Sayce in the records of the past, we are told of a dwelling which the gods created for the first human beings, a dwelling in which they became great and increased in numbers, and the location of which is described in words exactly corresponding to those of Iranian, Indian, Chinese, Eddaic, and Aztec literature, namely, in the center of the earth. Among the ancient Inca subjects of Peru was found the same idea of a navel of the earth, and even among the Chickasaws of Mississippi. Thus is all ancient thought full of this legendary idea of a mysterious primeval holy paradisic earth center, a spot connected as is no other with the center of heaven, the paradise of God. Why it should be so no one has ever told us, but the hypothesis which places the biblical Eden at the pole, and makes all latter earth navels commemorative of that primal one, affords a perfect explanation. In the light of it, there is no difficulty in understanding that earth center in Jerusalem with which we began. The inconspicuous pillar in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre symbolizes and commemorates far more than the geographical ignorance of medieval ages. It stands for the Japanese pillar by which the first soul born upon earth mounted to the sky. It stands for the world column of the East Aryans in the Chinvat Bridge of Iran. It stands for the law-proclaiming pillar of Orichalcum in Atlantis, placed in the center of the most central land. It stands for that Talmudic pillar by means of which the tenants of the terrestrial paradise mount to the celestial, and having spent the Sabbath return to pass the week below. It symbolizes Cardo, Atlas, Meru, Hera Berazatai, Karsakura, every fabulous mountain on whose top the sky pivots itself, and around which all the heavenly bodies ceaselessly revolve. It perpetuates a religious symbolism which existed in its region before ever Jerusalem had been made the Hebrew capital, recalling to our modern world the Tabur Haaretz of a period anterior to the days of Samuel. In tradition, it is said to mark the precise spot whence the clay was taken, out of which the body of Adam was modeled. It does so, but it does it in a language and method which were common to all the most ancient nations of the earth. It points not to the soil in which it stands, but to the holier soil of a far-away primitive Eden. In Freemasonic temples, on Freemasonic tracing boards, and upon Freemasonic aprons can be found similar symbolism pointing to these concepts, namely a flat earth framed by pillars, covered by an arch firmament, often with the tallest or most prominent pillar positioned centrally and a single eye representing Polaris situated above it. The sun and moon are also usually shown on either side, representing their paths and positions over and around the flat earth. This knowledge was clearly widespread among the ancient world, but in modern times has become occulted by certain such secret societies and vested interests. Dr. William Warren wrote, "Everywhere, therefore, in the most ancient ethnic thought, in the Egyptian, Akkadian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Indian, Persian, Chinese, and Greek, everywhere is encountered this conception of what, looked at with respect to its base and magnitude, is called the mountain of the world, but looked at with respect to its glorious summit and its celestial inhabitants, is styled the mountain of the gods." We need not pursue the investigation further. Enough has been said to warrant the assertion of Dr. Samuel Beal. It is plain that this idea of a lofty central primeval mountain belonged to the undivided human race. Elsewhere, the same learned sinologue has said, "I have no doubt that the idea of a central mountain, and of the rivers flowing from it, and the abode of the gods upon its summit, is a primitive myth derived from the earliest traditions of our race." In concluding this sketch of ancient cosmology, one further question naturally and inevitably thrusts itself upon us. It is this: how are the rise and the so wide diffusion of this singular world view to be explained? In other words, how came it to pass that the ancestors of the oldest historic races and peoples agreed to regard the North Pole as the true summit of the earth, and the circumpolar sky as the true heaven? The ancient world's mythologies regarding a magnetic mountain, four-directional rivers, and other more fantastical features at the North Pole are shockingly consistent. But what did the earliest known explorers, historians, and cartographers have to say about the subject? Pytheas, the earliest recorded explorer of the North Pole in the 4th century BC, claimed to discover an island he called Thule, or Thule, the farthest northern land, and gave an account sounding straight out of ancient mythology. In his lost book entitled On the Ocean, Pytheas wrote, "The island was more than 40,000 stadia, and in this region there was no longer either land properly so called, or sea or air, but a kind of substance concreted from all these elements, resembling a sea lungs, a thing which the earth, the sea, and all the elements are held in suspension, and this is a sort of bond to hold all together, which you can neither walk nor sail upon." Pytheas claimed upon reaching the northernmost point accessible, that land, air, and water somehow became like one substance similar to a jellyfish, and was completely impassable. Little remains of Pytheas's original account, but second-hand sources like Strabo inform us regarding the inhabitants of the surrounding northern islands. He says that of the animals and domesticated fruits there is an utter dearth of some, and scarcity of others, and that the people live on millet and other herbs, and on fruits and roots, and where there are grain and honey, the people get their beverage also from them. As for the grain, he says, since they have no pure sunshine, they pound it out in large storehouses, after first gathering in the ears thither, for the threshing floors become useless, because of this lack of sunshine, and because of the rains. Pliny the Elder also wrote of Pytheas's journey in his Naturalis Historia, stating that, On summer days, the sun approached nearer to the top of the world, owing to a natural circuit of light. The underlying parts of the earth have continuous days for 6 months at a time, and continuous nights when the sun has withdrawn in the opposite direction towards winter. Pytheas of Morellus writes that this occurs in the island of Thule, 6 days' voyage north from Britain. Pytheas states that north of Britain the tides rise 80 cubits. The most remote of all is Thule, in which we have pointed out there are no nights at midsummer when the sun is passing through the sign of the Crab, and on the other hand, no days at midwinter. Indeed, some writers think this is the case for periods of 6 months at a time without a break. 1 day's sail from Thule is the frozen ocean, called by some the Cronian Sea. Benjamin Franklin da Costa wrote, "The earliest voyage to the north that is claimed for Pytheas, the distinguished Phoenician astronomer and geographer of Marseilles, who flourished 320 B.C. His works were extant in the 5th century, but are no longer found. Pliny and Eratosthenes gave full credit to his narrations, though Strabo shows great hostility to Pytheas, whose accounts he refused to receive, saying that he made use of his acquaintance with astronomy and mathematics to fabricate his false narrative. Pliny, however, with more reason, thought that he employed his knowledge in practical exploration. The latest editor of Strabo does not share in his author's doubt. According to Pliny and others, Pytheas sailed through the Straits of Gibraltar, making his way north to the British Isles, whither it was the custom of his countrymen to resort, and after travelling over England on foot, proceeded northward to a place called Thule, 6 days' sail from the northern part of Britain. Even before the 4th century B.C., similar claims were made by ancient Greek and Roman poets and historians like Pindar, Herodotus, Hesiod, Homer, then later Virgil and Cicero, regarding Hyperborea and the Hyperboreans, meaning place or people beyond the north wind. They said the people of Hyperborea were giants who lived for over 1,000 years and enjoyed lives of perfect happiness. In another lost book, written in the 4th century B.C., Hecatus of Abdera collated all the known stories written about the Hyperboreans. Diodorus Siculus references this lost work, stating that in the regions beyond the land of the Celts there lies in the ocean an island no smaller than Sicily. This island, the account continues, is situated in the north and is inhabited by the Hyperboreans, who are called by that name because their home is beyond the point whence the north wind, Boreas, blows, and the island is both fertile and productive of every crop and has a temperate climate. The classical Greek poet Pindar wrote that never the muse is absent from their ways. Lyres clash and flutes cry, and everywhere maiden choruses whirling. Neither disease nor bitter old age is mixed in their sacred blood. Far from labor and battle they live. And reminiscent of Pythias's strange account, Pindar stated that neither by ship nor on foot would you find the marvelous road to the assembly of the Hyperboreans. Similar to Thule and Hyperborea, the Celts also had their northern terrestrial paradise, known as Avalon. Saint Brandon, son of Finhlogo, a famous saint of the Irish Church, who died in 576 A.D., was allegedly the first to reach this land during a sea voyage to the north. Similar to other ancient accounts, St. Brandon mentioned a fountain with 4 directional streams, and claimed there were magnificent castles and castle halls lighted with self-luminous stones, and adorned with all manner of precious jewels surpassing description. In 1035 A.D., Archbishop Adalbert, the vicar of Scandinavia, sent a team of Frisian nobles to explore the northern polar region, after which Adam of Bremen recorded their experiences in the book Gesta Hammaburgensis Ecclesiae Pontificum. Similar to accounts of the Hyperboreans, the Frisian explorers claimed to reach an island where they encountered giant human beings living in caves and underground hollows. The giants' domiciles were adorned in gold and precious metals, which some of the Frisians stupidly attempted to steal, and were swiftly chased back to their boats, minus one of their comrades caught by a giant who, quote, in a twinkling tore him to pieces before their eyes. They never reached the North Pole or a magnetic mountain, but did encounter an incredible feature long alleged to surround them. Ancient Norse legend states that a gigantic violent maelstrom or whirlpool, known as Hvergelmir, or the World's Well, surrounds the polar mountain, and via 4 6-hour daily cycles of pushing and pulling through subterranean channels cause the rising and falling of tides on Earth. Adam of Bremen recounts the Frisian explorers' deadly encounter with this abysmal chasm as such. Of a sudden they fell into that numbing ocean's dark mist which could hardly be penetrated with the eyes, and behold, the current of the fluctuating ocean whirled back to its mysterious fountainhead, and with most furious impetuosity drew the unhappy sailors, who in their despair now thought only of death, on to chaos. This, they say, is the abysmal chasm, that deep in which report has it that all the backflow of the sea, which appears to decrease, is absorbed and in turn re-vomited, as the mounting fluctuation is usually described. As the partners were imploring the mercy of God to receive their souls, the backward thrust of the sea carried away some of their ships, but its forward ejection threw the rest far behind the others. Freed thus by the timely help of God from the instant peril they had had before their eyes, they seconded the flood by rowing with all their might. Besides the Norse legends of Hvergelmir, historical records of this world well can be found as early as the 8th century A.D., when Paulus Diaconus, or Paul the Deacon, Benedictine monk, scribe and historian of the Lombards, wrote in his Historia Langobardorum that not far from the shore, where the ocean extends without bounds, is that very deep abyss of waters which we commonly call the ocean's navel. It is said twice a day to suck the waves into itself and to spew them out again, as is proved to happen all along these coasts, where the waves rush in and go back again with fearful rapidity. By the whirlpool of which we have spoken, it is asserted that ships are often drawn in with such rapidity that they seem to resemble the flight of arrows through the air, and sometimes they are lost in the gulf with a very frightful destruction. Often, just as they are about to go under, they are brought back again by a sudden shock of the waves, and they are sent out again thence with the same rapidity with which they were drawn in. Giraldus Cambrensis, or Gerald of Wales, Archdeacon of Brecon, historian and royal clerk to King Henry II, wrote in his 1188 work, Topographia Hibernica, that, not far from the islands towards the north, there is an astonishing whirlpool in the sea, towards which there is a set of current of the waves from all corners, until, pouring themselves into nature's secret recesses, they are swallowed up, as it were, in the abyss. Should a vessel chance to pass in that direction, it is caught and drawn along by the force of the waves, and sucked by the vortex without chance of escape. There are 4 of these whirlpools in the ocean, described by philosophers as existing in the 4 different quarters of the world, whence it has been conjectured that the currents of the sea, as well as the winds, are regulated by fixed principles. The whirlpool was also mentioned in another late 12th century work, Historia Norwegiae, where the author, an anonymous Norwegian monk, gives a particularly detailed description, stating, "The greatest of all whirlpools is to be found there, which engulfs the strongest ships, sucking them in at ebb tide, and spewing out their fragments with a belch at flood tide. There is a very deep abyss in the earth itself, and alongside it are open-mouthed caverns containing winds which are said to be brought forth by the breathing of the water, and these are the breath of gales. Indeed, by their breathing, these winds draw to them the waters of the sea. Through hidden passages in the earth, they shut them up in the vaults of the abyss, and then by the same force drive them out again, causing sea surges, spates, and the whirling of waterspouts. Earthquakes also occur, and various discharges of vapor and conflagration, for when the wind's breath, held in the cheeks of earth, presses to burst out, it shakes the foundation of the world with a dreadful roaring, and forces it to tremble. So when the wind's breath contends with fire in the earth's interior, then even in mid-ocean the depths are fissured, and smoky exhalations and sulphurous flames are seen to emerge." By the 13th century AD, the idea of a magnetic mountain at the North Pole was widely known enough that Italian poet Guido Guinizelli actually used it as a simile for the power of his woman's love. The section from his poem, Madonna, the fine love I give you, translated reads, "In that land beneath the north wind are the magnetic mountains, which transmit to the air their power to attract the iron, but because it is far away, it needs help from a similar stone to make the compass needle turn towards the pole star." In the 14th century, two lost books, Inventio Fortunata by Nicholas Delin and the Itinerarium of Jacobus Sinoian, mention the magnetic mountain, 4 directional rivers, and encircling whirlpool said to change every 6 hours, causing the tides, comparing them to the breath of God at the navel of the earth, inhaling and exhaling the great seas. Many citations from the two books are made by more modern sources, but surviving copies have unfortunately all been lost to antiquity. Nicholas Delin was an English Minorite friar of Oxford, a mathematician, astronomer, and explorer who lived from 1330 to 1390. He was fascinated by the astrolabe and actually produced several of them for patrons and his own personal use. John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, even commissioned Nicholas to produce an astrolabe and a calendarium of complete astronomical tables covering 1387 to 1463, which were later used to create nautical almanacs. For this, Nicholas became famously known as the man with the astrolabe, and was even complimented and lauded as an astronomical genius by Geoffrey Chaucer in his Treatise on the Astrolabe. His esteem as a knowledgeable astronomer and navigator soon reached King Edward III, who in the early 1360s sent Nicholas and a team of ships to explore the Arctic. Benjamin Franklin da Costa wrote, "The work by which Nicholas of Lynn will longest be remembered is not now to be found. Its disappearance under any circumstances is not a matter of surprise, since of many important works once well known no copy remains today, while of others there are only 1 or 2 examples. Unfortunately, we know almost as little about the voyages made from Lynn by the fellow townsmen of Nicholas as about the book in question. Many hardy mariners sailed from the port of Lynn, but of their enterprise at the north only the most scanty memorials remain. It is nevertheless clear that their activity was appreciated by Edward III, while their neighbors of Blakeney were several times favored by that king on account of their superior merit. What we know about Nicholas de Lynn, his polar explorations, and his lost book now come from existing citations and quotations from his contemporaries and readers. One such man was Jacobus Sinoian, a Dutch explorer who composed a book of travel epics in Flemish, also lost to antiquity, but quoted and reprinted in later works still available. Snoyen is referenced as learning from the Minorite Nicholas de Lynn that large parts of the polar indrawing sea did not freeze over in winter. Speaking of Nicholas, Snoyen wrote, "The priest who had the astrolabe related to the King of Norway that in 1360 A.D. there had come to these northern islands an English Minorite from Oxford who was a good astronomer. Leaving the rest of the party who had come to the islands, he journeyed further through the whole of the north, and put into writing all the wonders of those islands, and gave the King of England this book, which he called in Latin Inventio Fortunatae, which book began at latitude 54 degrees, continuing to the pole." Both Nicholas and Snoyen's books contained a detailed map of the Arctic derived from Nicholas's journeys, which included a magnetic mountain at the North Pole, 4 directional streams, encircling whirlpool, and surrounding islands. Luckily for posterity, a version of this map still survives to this day, because it was used for Johannes Ruij's 1508 map of the world, and later reproduced in detail and published in 1595 by the most well-known cartographer in history, responsible for the most popular maps ever created, Gerardus Mercator. On the legend of Ruij's map, Nicholas de Lynn's Inventio Fortunata is referenced as its source, stating that "it is written in the book of the fortunate discovery that under the Arctic pole there is a high magnetic rock 33 German miles in circumference. A surging sea surrounds this rock, as if the water were discharged downward from a vase through an opening to 4 mouths below. Around are islands, of which 2 are inhabited. Mountains vast and wide surround these islands, 24 of which deny habitation to man. Another inscription on Reyush's map describes the incredible magnetic effect of the polar lodestone mountain, stating, "Here the ship's compass loses its property, and no vessel with iron on board is able to get away." Chet Van Duzer wrote, "A world map by Johannes Ruisch, the Universalior Cogniti Orbis Tabula, published in an edition of Ptolemy's Geographia in Rome in 1508, shows 4 islands around the North Pole. 2, the one north of Greenland, and its opposite across the pole, are labeled Insula Deserta. The one north of Europe is that of the Hyperboreans, and the one north of America is labeled Aranfe." He labels the waters within the 4 islands as the Mare Sugenum, and speaks of a violent whirlpool that sucks the incoming waters down into the earth. In addition, his map shows a ring of small, very mountainous islands around the 4 islands, which numerous islands Reyush says are uninhabited. This would seem to indicate that the book written by Nicholas of Lynn was known to the mapmaker, while also it may have been known at Rome. It is evident that the polar region was drawn more or less in accordance with some plan by Nicholas, which was combined with later material. Around the magnetic rock, immediately under the pole, are 4 islands: Aranfe, Insula Deserta, Hyperbore Europa, and Insula Deserta. Outside of these islands are smaller and mountainous islands, arranged in a semicircle, while the peninsula of Pilopalanti, with its base resting upon Europe, pushes out into this druidic arrangement of islands, bearing up what is intended to represent a church, with the legend Sancti Adolphi. Eastward of this peninsula is the Provincia Obscura and the Mare Sugenum. Westward of Berga Extrema, another peninsula enters the groups of islands, which is pierced by Planura de Berga at the extreme west. The Mare Sugenum also fills the west. South of Greenland is Terra Nova, or Newfoundland. From the Mare Sugenum, the water flows northward through the 4 openings into the polar basin. The arrangement is curious, yet not wholly without resemblance to what is found in nature, for what is called the polar basin is fed by several vast streams pouring into it from the warm regions at the south. These streams also create counter-currents, which flow southward, bearing enormous quantities of the heaviest ice. Swedish historian Olaus Magnus wrote of both the magnetic mountain and surrounding whirlpool in his 1555 work Historia de Gentibus Septentrionabilis, a description of the northern peoples, stating it to be a well-known fact that ships in the north must be built with wooden pegs, as iron nails would be pulled out by the northern lodestone mountain, and that, quote, "between Roest and Lofoten is so great an abyss, or rather Charybdis, that it suddenly swamps and swallows up in an instant those mariners who incautiously approach. Pieces of wreckage are very seldom thrown up again, and if they come to light, the hard material shows such signs of wear and chafing through being dashed against the rocks that it looks as if it were covered with rough wool." Just 2 years later, in 1557, English explorer Anthony Jenkinson also wrote of the whirlpool, saying, "Note that there is between the said Rost Island and Lofot a whirlpool called Mallestrand, which from half ebb until half flood maketh such a terrible noise that it shaketh the rings and the doors of inhabitants' houses of the said islands 10 miles off. Also, if there cometh any whale within the current of the same, they make a pitiful cry. Moreover, if great trees be carried into it by force of streams, and after with the ebb be cast out again, the ends and boughs of them have been so beaten that they are like the stalks of hemp that is bruised." A few decades later, in 1591, Schonebold, a man who was sheriff of Lofoten and Vesteralen for over 20 years, wrote a similar description, claiming that, quote, "iron rings on house doors are shaken hither and thither by the rushing of the current, Whales who cannot go forward on account of the strong stream give a great cry and then are gone. And great trees, spruce or fir, which disappear in this current, and when at last they come up again, then all the boughs, all the roots and all the bark is torn off, and it is shaped as though it had been cut up with a sharp axe. The most famous mapmaker who ever lived, and likely the only person in the history of cartography to become a household name, Gerardus Mercator, known for his meticulous accuracy and responsible for the popular Mercator projection, lived from 1512 to 1594 and created hundreds of detailed maps. The year after his death, in 1595, his family compiled his life's work into an atlas, which included never-before-released reproductions of Nicholas Delisle's maps of the polar regions, specifically the Septentrionalium Terrarum Descriptio. This incredible map shows the polar magnetic mountain, said to be the highest in the world, named Rupes Nigra, encircling whirlpool, 4 directional rivers, and surrounding islands in fine detail, along with several revealing inscriptions. Chet Van Duzer wrote, "The map shows a North Pole that is very unfamiliar to modern eyes. At the center of the map, and right at the pole, stands a huge black mountain. This mountain was made of lodestone, and was the source of the Earth's magnetic field. The central mountain is surrounded by open water, and then further out by 4 large islands that form a ring around the pole. The largest of these islands, perhaps 700 by 1100 miles, and they all have high mountains along their southern rims. These islands are separated by 4 large inward-flowing rivers, which are aligned as if to the 4 points of the compass, though of course there is no north, east, or west at the North Pole. Every direction from this center is south. Mercator's notes inform us that the waters of the oceans are carried northward to the pole through these rivers with great force, such that no wind could make a ship sail against the current. The waters then disappear into an enormous whirlpool beneath the mountain at the pole, and are absorbed into the bowels of the earth. Mercator also tells us that 4-foot-tall pygmies inhabit the island closest to Europe. In another inscription made on the map, Mercator informs the reader further regarding the great whirlpool, stating that a monstrous gulf in the sea towards which from all sides the billows of the sea come from remote parts, converge and run together as though brought there by conduit, pouring into these mysterious abysses of nature, they are as though devoured thereby, and should it happen that a vessel pass there, it is seized and drawn away with such powerful violence of the waves that this hungry force immediately swallows it up, never to appear again. Gerardus Mercator studied at the University of Louvain in 1549, where he met and befriended another very influential figure of his time, John Dee, astronomer, astrologer, and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. Dee was convinced that a route to the Indies could be found through the Northwest Passage, and while attempting to interest Queen Elizabeth to support an expedition, he contacted Mercator for more information. In Mercator's 1577 letter back to Dee, we learn he copied verbatim from Jacobus Snoyen's Itinerarium, stating that in the midst of the 4 countries is a whirlpool, into which there empty these 4 indrawing seas, which divide the north, and the water rushes round and descends into the earth, just as if one were pouring it through a filter funnel. It is 4 degrees wide on every side of the pole, that is to say 8 degrees altogether, except that right under the pole there lies a bare rock in the midst of the sea. Its circumference is almost 33 French miles, and it is all of magnetic stone, and is as high as the clouds, so the priest said, who had received the astrolabe from this Minorite in exchange for a testament, and the Minorite himself had heard that one can see all around it from the sea, and that it is black and glistening, and nothing grows thereon, for there is not so much as a handful of soil on it. This is word for word everything that I copied out of this author years ago. As late as the mid-17th century, aspects of these polar phenomena continued appearing in cartography and cosmography. The Euripi, or 4 indrawing streams, were included or alluded to in Lischoten's 1595 map, the Ortelius of 1599, Quad's Fasciculus Geographicus of 1608, Hondius's 1619 map, Purchas's map of 1625, and in Heylyn's 1659 cosmography he wrote about the Rupus nigra and surrounding whirlpool and Eurípe, stating that under the Arctic pole is said to be a black rock of wondrous height, about 33 leagues in compass, the land adjoining being torn by the sea into 4 great islands. For the ocean violently breaking through it, and disgorging itself by 19 channels, maketh 4 Eurípe or fierce whirlpools, by which the waters are finally carried towards the north, and these swallowed into the bowels of the earth. That Eurípis or whirlpool which is made by the Scythic Ocean hath 5 inlets, and by reason of his straight passage and violent course is never frozen. The other on the back of Greenland, being 37 leagues long, hath 3 inlets, and remaineth frozen 3 months yearly. Between these two lieth an island, on the north of Lapia and Biarmia, inhabited, as they say, by pygmies, the tallest of them not above 4 foot high. A certain scholar of Oxford reporteth that these 4 Eurípe are carried with such furious violence towards some gulf, in which they are finally swallowed up, that no ship is able with never so strong a gale to stem the current, and yet there is never so strong a wind as to blow a windmill. There is modern circumstantial evidence that lends strong credence to this idea as well. The largest publicly known maelstrom in the world is called Saltstraumen, just north of the Arctic Circle in Norway, where 400 million cubic meters of water pass through a 3-kilometer long, 150-meter wide strait, reaching speeds of 10 meters per second. Similar to legends of Vergelmer, this northern whirlpool actually arises exactly 4 times per day, every 6 hours, along with the shifting of the tides. In fact, the majority of naturally occurring whirlpools in the world, including the famous Naruto whirlpools in Japan, form 4 times per day, every 6 hours, as the tides change. If the entire ancient world's mythologies, along with early explorers, historians, and cartographers, all shared similar accounts of a polar magnetic mountain, encircling whirlpool, 4 directional streams, and surrounding islands occupied by giants and or pygmies, why is it that no modern accounts of the North Pole have a single mention of any such thing? How is it possible for such consistency in polar geography to exist throughout the ancient world? Why have all these features suddenly disappeared from modern maps? Were the ancients all completely mistaken with regards to the North Pole? Or are we now, in modern times, the victims of a concerted cover-up, and being deceived about what is really at the pole?